All right, so thank you for attending FOCIL Breakout 5. We have roughly 6 agenda. Firstly, there was a discussion on solo stakers and censorship resistance on Twitter. We want to scale Ethereum, but without sacrificing verifiability and censorship resistance. This is where solo stakers kick in, having a diverse set of participants, each with a different interest would be the powerful way to achieve this, especially when it comes to censorship resistance. But today, censorship resistance on Ethereum currently relies on solo stakers who locally build blocks. However, they have to forego the profits they could have earned if they used map boost. But with FOCIL, solo stakers no longer need to choose either of profits and censorship resistance. They can still signal what should be included in a block without sacrificing their revenue by using map boost, for example. So FOCIL opens the door for better scaling as it allows us to explore more into PBS or APS, as well as it makes solo stakers relatively bigger in the censorship resistance service. There should be a link to the Twitter in the GitHub, so please take a look if you are more interested. And we also covered the compatibility between delayed execution and FOCIL. There have been different designs proposed for delayed execution, including delayed state root inclusion, delayed execution using static validation and skip transactions, and payload block separation. The idea is to remove the transaction execution from the critical path and delay it, which could help increase the block as limit. Francesco suggests a way to make FOCIL compatible with delayed execution, the one that introduced skip transactions. What mainly it does is it enables sort of static IL validation using bit field. We add a bit field over the IL committee to a block, and a proposer marks bits corresponding to the ILs that it took into consideration when building a block. And during the static validation phase, testers check if the IL specified in the bit field is a superset of their collected ILs. And they don't check if all IL transactions are included. They just care about the bit field exclusively. And in the next slot, a proposer validates whether the head block contains all valid transactions in the ILs specified by the bit field. And it extends the head block if it does, or extends the parent otherwise. Testers follow the same process to decide whether to vote for the head block or the parent. The idea is similar to how we make FOCIL compatible with ePBS. So please take a look into the Francesco's HackMD for more information. And next up is, there was a discussion about IL building rules proposed by Mark. It was about optimizing for throughput. So, but before we make any conclusion, I think it would be great if we can have an open discussion. So Mark, could you elaborate it? Is Mark here?
Yeah, I'm here. I can speak a bit about this. So kind of what started me thinking about this is, so currently we don't specify the rules for inclusion list building. So different client implementations are able to just come up with their own rules. And the idea here is that, clients will come up with quite a diverse set of rules for building an inclusion list. And this could help with censorship resistance. So I think this can be a good thing. And we should kind of leave it unspecified, but I think there are also some potential dangers there. So I think in the worst case, we might kind of see a situation where a lot of clients implement a very similar set of rules where they score transactions, like decide which ones they want to include in a very similar way. For example, they might all just order by priority fee. And if something like that happens, so everyone's using the same set of rules, which are completely deterministic, then all of the 16 different people who are creating inclusion lists would create the same inclusion list, right? And so ultimately, we're going to take the union of all of these transactions, but the union of 16 different identical inclusion lists is going to be one 8 kilobyte inclusion list. So sorry to specify that. So every individual's inclusion list is 8 kilobytes, and we combine them all. If they're all the same, it will be 8 kilobytes in the end. Whereas if they all had kind of different inclusion lists with no overlap, then we could potentially get up to 128 kilobytes. Sorry. So kind of what I'm saying is, I think that we should attempt to kind of encourage client implementations to do things in a way where we don't have too much overlap. I think we should still leave it kind of unspecified so they can experiment with different ways of doing things. But by having less overlap between inclusion lists, we can ultimately have a much larger inclusion list, which means that we can kind of just have higher bandwidth of censorship resistance. Because in my opinion, just having one 8 kilobyte inclusion list isn't really sufficient. Like if there's a mass exit, something like that, then we need more than 8 kilobytes to kind of force include all of those transactions. So that's the background, and sort of what I've proposed is kind of two different things that client implementations kind of could consider. One of those is using some randomness. So having just some non-determinism can kind of mix things up a bit and reduce the chance that we're going to have all sort of very overlapping inclusion lists. And the other thing that I've suggested is with this randomness, having some bias. So by bias, I mean that an implementation will be slightly more likely to select some transactions over other transactions. And the way this could be done is basically we want to do this so that each one is biased in a slightly different way, so that overall there's going to be less overlap. So the way that I've proposed to do this is we have these 16 different members of the IL committee. So for these 16 different members, we can assign them all their own unique ID, right? So we can call these 0 through F, the different IL committee members. And what I'm saying is we could bias it so that if you're committee member A, then if you see a transaction in the mempool with a hash that starts with A, you would be slightly more likely to include that transaction. And in this way, we could kind of significantly reduce the amount of overlap between inclusion lists. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can maybe add some thoughts. Like, this is something that I've been thinking for a while as well. I think my general feedback to this is that I do want to see, like, no, I definitely agree. I think most of us will all agree on basically giving a set of recommendations on EL clients to follow. But then I do know that I think that's kind of missing in the EIP today is that there's no set of recommendations. People, it's kind of vague in a way, but it would be nice to have a list of items that people can follow. For example, like priority fees, random order, or sort by how long the transactions has been in the mempool, sort by how many times the transaction has been reordered and stuff like that. I think the question is that do we want some sort of random rule and then also having a random rule, but also add some implementation complexity. For example, adding the committee index, passing through engine API. I think I think I probably want to wait on changing the engine API for this because we don't know if we actually need it yet. I think that's actually one implementation complexity that's like kind of like I don't want to having to do that, but at the end having to take it out later, realize we don't need it in a way, right? I think maybe we need some like basically maybe some like study on this topic. We can just look at today's mempool and then give like 2 to 3 IO building algorithm and just to see how efficient it is without some sort of random order subset type of algorithm. And then if it's not sufficient, then we can maybe go back and say, okay, well, now we need to fix that. One way to fix this is like you said, by adding some index field in the engine API so we get better randomness. But I think without some sort of study like that, maybe we should hold up on changing the engine API. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. The EIP should be more clear on giving some set of recommendations that people can follow. That's just my minor feedback.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in my opinion, like it seems like quite a minimal change to just pass in this additional argument. And then, it just gives clients then the option of what they want to do with it. So yeah, again, I'm not maybe before I was presenting it as like this is like a specific algorithm, but I really think it can be a good thing to leave it unspecified. But yeah, just if we kind of so I've made a PR to the EIP and it kind of, lists some of these things that you might want to consider, like time spent in the mempool, etc. And I think that, if we just add this small argument, then that would give clients the option to use this if they want to. And also, this is generally a thing where even though it's not like imposing a certain set of rules, you do need to kind of coordinate some kind of standard beforehand, right? Like, assign these IDs and agree that you're gonna, have this mapping of IDs to different transactions, right? So it's kind of something where it makes sense to at least mention it in the IP so that everyone does it in the same way and the different implementations will work together.
Do we have any more ideas or feedback on this?
I can send to the chat the PR. It's already linked in the GitHub, but if anyone has any feedback, they could leave it there on the ETH Magicians thread as well.
All right, so for now, I think we can conclude that Mark's proposal would be considered as one of the solutions when we want to prioritize throughput, but we think we need more study on that topic before changing engine API. And in the meantime, we can modify EIP to have some recommendations to follow. And yes, thank you for sharing the link to the PR. That brings us to the next agenda. And Mark wanted to discuss his PR and get some feedback. So do you want to talk about it more, Mark?
Yeah, so I've made two PRs basically. So one is this kind of recommendation for an actual like change to, add this stuff. And the other one is just kind of fixing a few things that seem that could be clarified or not completely accurate. So to the EIP, I added some of the engine API changes that Jihoon had written up somewhere else, just to put it all in one place. Just clarified a few things. But I think the most important thing I saw was that in the EIP, in many places, it says that if the payload doesn't satisfy the inclusion list, then it's invalid. And it says this in quite a few different places, and also kind of says things about the implementation based on this. Whereas from kind of speaking to Terence, I've realized like that's not exactly the case. So the payload should still actually be considered valid if it doesn't satisfy the inclusion list, but the CL will try to reorg it. So yeah, the biggest change I made was kind of writing this up and kind of changing all of this. So yeah, if anyone could also review that would be good, because this does make quite a big difference in the actual implementation on the EL side.
Right, so please take a look into the PR and give some feedback. And Mark, thank you for your feedback on the GET implementation.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I think we can move on to the next agenda. We have an issue in the interop between Prism and Lodestar. We are suffering from state root mismatch and invalid signature because of the use of wrong fork domain. Can we talk about how this issue is being handled?
I have not looked into the issue, unfortunately. I've been busy with Petra stuff, but yeah, I will probably start looking at it once Petra becomes more stable. But yeah, I wonder if anyone else has any input on this.
Right, no worries. Do we have anyone from Lodestar?
Right. Yeah, so basically it's probably just what I mentioned in the Discord channel. It's basically Prism wasn't setting the correct fork version in the beacon state, and that yields to one of the causes for invalid signature, which is rejected by Lodestar. And it looks like I don't know what Terrence did and if he fixed this issue yet or not. But last night I ran the latest version of Prism, and it still has this invalid signature issue. Maybe it's a different cause than before, but I'm not sure yet. So I still need to go through it.
Great. So after we somehow have this issue fixed, then we will likely have the first interrupt between CL and CL. Yes, so I think now we covered the most of agenda already. Last but not least, we can do status updates. I guess I can go first. I've gave a FOCIL talk at Consensus Hong Kong. I wanted to give an ELI 5 of FOCIL, why we want to have inclusion list, how it works, basically the intuitions behind inclusion list. Let me share the URL to the recording in the chat. And I also fixed GET to support the transition from Electra to FOLU, then FOCIL fork, and that's all from my end.
Not much from my end. I'm mostly focusing on Petra. So once Petra is in a good state, I will go back to FOSSIL.
Haven't been sorry. Haven't been feeling well since the better part of last week, so I haven't been able to make too much progress on the RAT implementation. But yeah, turning a corner on that, and yeah, hoping to get back to it.
For the Nethermind implementation, I can't report too much progress. I mean, I was hoping to kind of start testing interop with Prism, but then I kind of realized some of these things with the spec that that I needed to end up changing the implementation. But yeah, I mean, hopefully now that I've kind of gone through and made these spec changes, it should be a little bit more streamlined for other client teams. Yeah, on the Lodestar side, last week I rebased the FOCIL implementation on FULU. Previously it was on Electra, just so that it could place it can play nicely with Prism more. But yeah, but moving forward, I think we still want to add the flexibility so that we can have FULU activation and the EIP 7805 fork activation in the same epoch for Lodestar. But other than that, it's still pretty minor. There's not much of code change on Lodestar side, mostly just testing.
On Teku side, last week I ran a first interop with few Teku nodes. We are creating and publishing inclusion lists. There are still some missing steps on the fork choice side, but I think we're ready to run some tests, some interrupts with other clients. That's my goal. Hopefully, I will try to do that this week.
Do you mean interrupt with EL or CL?
Can you repeat?
I wonder, do you mean what do you mean by interrupt? Like, do you mean interrupt with EL or other consensus?
No, actually, I was running just two nodes, running Teku and some stub EL that generates just some random inclusion lists.
Oh, I see.
Oh.
Do we have anyone from Lighthouse? I guess Lighthouse shared their updates last time. I guess no. So that's all for this FOCIL breakout. Does anyone want to share more updates or have anything more to discuss?
Yeah, hello. Updates from me. I built some draft metrics on Prism, but yeah, stuck a little bit with merging new updates, and yeah, probably for the next session I will already show a dashboard. I hope it will be ready next time.
Great. Yeah, anyone else? All right, then I think that's it for today. Thank you for your attending. Have a great rest of your day, and let's convene after 2 weeks.